Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben. I'm back again today doing another video. And the subject of today's video is going to be a continuation of the Rise and Fall series that I've been doing. If you haven't checked out any of the other videos in the series, go check out the playlist on the channel. There's a bunch of other videos in there. And the purpose of this series is to examine NBA contenders or different teams and different eras for different teams. And I want to pay tribute and focus on different teams that haven't really been talked about much after the fact. And so I've been looking at various NBA contenders that don't get talked about much, or um, today I'm actually going to probably be talking about the least successful of any of the teams I've examined so far. But I think it's a really interesting era to me because you have a lot of notable names on this Clippers team with Elton Brand, but they just never were really that good. And so I'm going to be covering them today. And without further ado, let's get into it. So we start our journey with Elton Brand's first season in Los Angeles, 2001 to 2. He had just been traded for number 2 overall pick Tyson Chandler, and this year he actually get one of the better seasons for the Clippers with Elton Brand there. And for the record, you'll see at top you have the regular season statistics like your record, what seed they were, their offense and defensive rating, and then below that you have their regular season stats as far as individuals. You have games played, minutes played, field goal attempts and percentage, same thing with 3-pointers and free throws, then total rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, points. So this first year, they actually had one of their better supporting casts as well. You know, between um, I'd say Elton Brand down to Corey Maggette, that's a really solid 7 dudes, and they all played relatively well for themselves. As far as efficiency goes, Michael Olakandi was pretty bad, but for the rest of them, they played relatively well for themselves. You had a young Corey Maggette, Richardson, Darius Miles, actually Olakandi was pretty young too. Actually, now that I look at it, everybody on this roster besides Jeff McGinnis was pretty young. They were pretty solid offensively. You know, Lamar had missed a lot of time. He missed all but uh, about 30 games of the regular season, so he's missing about 52 games. But besides that, you know, Corey Maggette missed about 20 games, but everybody else was healthy. And they were, I believe, they were only a few games off of making the playoffs this year. I don't remember who the 8 seed was, but they weren't that far off. So this was a team that had promise, and they were growing. You know, Elton Brand was still pretty young, but he was solid this year. A lot of good, solid supporting role players like Odom, Miles, Richardson, Maggette. You know, Olakandi and McGinnis, they were kind of the odd ducks here in that Olakandi was just bust, so like any production he was giving you that wasn't all-star level was going to look weird. And Jeff McGinnis was like the old dude amongst these young dudes, so he was sort of an outlier as well as far as his production because he was actually nearing the end of his career at this point. But he was, you know, technically the second option on this team this year. Going into the next season, this team fell off quite a bit, and if we want to look at some of the main reasons, you can again look at injuries as a major factor for why this team struggled. They also traded away Darius Miles for Andre Miller this year because they thought they had plenty of wings between Richardson and Maggette. And then also Jeff McGinnis was gone, and so they needed a point guard, so they had brought in Andre Miller. Besides that, again, you had some decent role players as far as um, still maintaining a lot of the same guys like Richardson, Maggette, and Odom. But yeah, getting back to my main point, injuries was a huge problem this year. Elton Brand missed 20 games. Michael Olakandi missed 46 games. Lamar Odom missed 33 games. Corey Maggette missed close to 20. Richard Jefferson missed, or excuse me, Quentin Richardson. I don't know where I got Richard Jefferson from. Quentin Richardson missed 23 games. So collectively, out of your main 6 guys, they're missing, let's see here. Let's just do for easy figuring 20, 50, 30, 20, 20. That's, I can't even keep track with my own counting. 20, 70 plus 30, that's 100 plus another 40. That's 140 games missed from your top 5 or 6 guys. So that's a huge blow to this team. But some positives, Corey Maggette started to really emerge this year, 17 points per game on 30 minutes a night. Lamar Odom had a pretty solid season for himself, setting a career high in points per game. Andre Miller, really solid. Michael Olakandi, pretty consistent with himself, and Elton Brand, really consistent during this time and put up his usual, but 18 to 20 points and 10 to 12 rebounds. Going into 03 to 04, a team that was basically the same record. And if you want to look at why this team didn't succeed, they lost a lot of those supporting pieces. Like they lost or they got rid of Michael Olakandi at this point. They lost Andre Miller, who I can't remember who they traded him for, but um, it might have been Eddie House down there or Keon Dooling. I don't quite remember, but yeah, they lost Andre Miller. They lost Lamar Odom, I believe it was, to free agency actually, and he went to Miami. So you basically had this really good core that basically got cut in half, and you only had left Richardson, Maggette, and Brand, and filling them in with a bunch of really, really young dudes. You know, these main three guys, Maggette, Richardson, and Brand, were already really young, but you're inserting even younger guys into this team. You know, Brand still has a really solid season, 20 and 10. Maggette, 21, 6 and 3. Richardson actually has the best season of his career as far as scoring, putting up 17 a game. So those three guys really excelled and collectively took a lot of shots, but overall, and you know that's reflected in their offensive rating, but their defense, they had nobody. You had a rookie Kamen trying his best. You had a really young Bobby Simmons and Marko Jaric, who none of those guys were really worthy of starting or being six men, but they were all thrust into those roles. And then you had some okay guys down later on the bench like Wilcox, Eddie House, Matt Barnes, just trying their best, but again, pretty young fellas, just playing roles that they weren't really cut out to play. You get into 04 to 05, they show some promise and they do get a bit better. And you have a season where you have more healthy people and more consistent options all around, in that you have Chris Kaman, who was a rookie, improve. You have Bobby Simmons actually win Most Improved Player of the Year, hopping up from 8 points a game to 16. You have Brand put up his typical 20 points, 10 rebounds. You actually had lost Quentin Richardson at this point, but Corey Maggette puts up his best statistical season yet at 22 points and 6 rebounds. Marko Jaric is getting thrown a ton of minutes at this point, and I never understood this. This dude is the most bland, average NBA player ever, but he was playing 33 minutes a night, and it really shows how poor this team was as far as the front office. And I don't mean to blame my man Elgin Baylor, who I love, but he essentially chose people like Marko Jaric and Sean Livingston, whose knees were about to blow out. He chose those two guys over the likes of Lamar Odom and Quentin Richardson, who are guys that left in free agency the prior 2 seasons over the off season. And they basically just did a lot of the rolling of the dice on their free agency moves and really looked at a lot of people's upside rather than their actual production. And that was really their downfall as far as a lot of what happened here, is that, you know, they took huge risks on guys like Bobby Simmons, Marko Jaric, Sean Livingston, Chris Kaman. They really put a lot of their stock into young, unproven people rather than their proven assets like um, Andre Miller, Lamar Odom, and Quentin Richardson. You get into 05 to 06, and this is actually their best season of this stretch. And below, you'll see regular season stats on the left, playoff stats on the right. They had a really good defense this year, and it can be attributed to a couple of things. Chris Kaman playing some pretty good defense, Elton Brand playing some pretty good defense, and then overall, just Mike Dunleavy Sr. instilling some really good defensive schemes on this team. They did make it to the second round of the playoffs, losing in the Game 7 to the Suns. And this was a team that was close. That like all the games in the series were pretty close, and even Game 7 was, I think, within like 8 points or something. They weren't far off from being a Western Conference Finals team, and you look at them and you kind of say, well, what? How did this happen? Well, they weren't really the 6th seed this year because Seeding back then was weird, where all the division winners got to be the top 3 seeds, and then the other teams had to go in accordingly. So really, the Clippers were more like the 4 or the 5 seed, but they looked like the 6 seed, and that was a weird thing. And they got to play the Nuggets in the first round, who were the 3rd seed, but really should have been like the 7th seed actually, based on their record. So that was a pretty easy first round for them, and then they gave the Suns a really good shot, but again, the Suns didn't have Amari Stoudemire either, so they caught another pretty good break in the second round. But you look at what was the big difference for this team? Well, they swindled the Minnesota Timberwolves out of Sam Cassell. That's right, recent All-Star Sam Cassell. The Timberwolves gave him up for Marko Jaric, the dude that I just called an absolute garbage NBA player. That's who they got as the big return for Sam Cassell, who, let me remind you, was very recently an All-Star, and this season for the Clippers had a great season, putting up 17 points per game as their second best player. You look at other factors why this Clippers team succeeded. In free agency, they brought in Cuttino Mobley, who was a really good option for them. And you basically had a really good starting lineup of Cassell, Mobley, Maggette, Brand, and Kaman. Kaman also started to develop quite a bit too, had a pretty good season efficiently, and put up 12 points and 10 rebounds. Elton Brand, best season of his career, 25 points a game, 10 rebounds. And they actually had a pretty good bench player in Vladimir Radmanovic, who, although he had some injuries and missed 50 games when he was healthy, he played pretty well. And he was healthy for them for the playoffs, too, so that helped quite a bit. And again, defensively, really good. And why is that? You had Brand, Cassell, and Kaman, who were all pretty good defenders. And Maggette was really athletic, so that if he wanted to be a good defender, he could at times. And as far as their playoff numbers, pretty close to what the regular season numbers were for everybody. You might look at a big difference being that Corey Maggette actually played more limited minutes, but I think you could attribute that more to just Cuttino Mobley playing a lot more and Elton Brand playing a lot more. And so Maggette just didn't find as much time. And then you had Sean Livingston playing a couple more minutes as well. But basically everybody played really well, and this is just the peak of a roster of this much talent, where you had a good starting lineup, and Radmanovic, decent sixth man, but that was really it. You had 6 guys who you could count on, and the Suns just were a deeper team. They had Nash, they had Raja Bell, they had Barbosa, Boris Diaw. That's just naming a couple off the top of my head, but they were just deeper overall, and the Clippers just barely missed getting to the Western Conference Finals versus the Mavericks. But they were close. The next year, 06 to 07, they were actually only 2 games out of the playoffs this year. The We Believe Warriors beat them out late in the season and were 42-40. This team was 40-42, so as I say, they just barely missed the playoffs. And you look at the core, pretty similar to the year before, except you had Sam Cassell miss like 24 games, and you had brought in basically Tim Thomas to replace Vladimir Radmanovic as a 6-man type, but you still had Kaman, Brand, Mobley, Maggette, and they all played pretty well. And there's nothing really that notable about this season, actually. It's basically just the same exact core, except you have injury issues with Sam Cassell, and the West is a little bit deeper than it was the year before. But basically the exact same team, honestly. So they just barely missed the playoffs. And then you had the last year of this team, and they fell off quite a bit. And the reason being, namely, Elton Brand missed essentially the entire season. As you can see in the stats, he played 8 games, basically missing the whole year. And this team was then asking others to step in and help fill in the gaps. You look at Sam Cassell missing nearly 50 games as well, and he was also getting older at this time. I believe he was like up to 30, 35, 36 years old, so he really was at the end of his career. And I believe this was actually the last season because they traded him away for, I don't remember who, but to the Celtics at the trade deadline they traded him. So yeah, this was a team essentially whose best players were Corey Maggette and Katino Mobley and Tim Thomas. And yeah, that's going to be a team that struggles. And Chris Kaman stepped up quite a bit this year. He averaged 16 and 13. And I don't think he was an all-star this year, but he was one of the seasons following this. He was an underrated player during this time. He was really consistent for them and really underappreciated, but pretty solid. And he doesn't really get brought up enough, but he was an all-star at one point, so that's good to note. So if I had to sum up why this Clippers team really overall didn't succeed as much as we would have thought, it boils down to, I think, maybe 3 reasons you'd say. Number one, the obvious one, and this isn't the biggest one, but it's just one of the obvious ones. In this 07 to 08 season, you had massive injuries, and this team would have looked way different if you would have had Sam Cassell play the whole season for them and Elton Brand play the whole season, where instead he basically missed the whole season. So that's a big factor. Number 2, you had some pretty head-scratching and very cheap front office moves in that you had a really, really solid core of guys when they had initially that team of Brand, Darius Miles, Quentin Richardson, Lamar Odom, and then, eventually the next year they had traded Miles for Andre Miller. But even if you go back to that 02 to 03 season, and I know that their record doesn't look very good, but that core overall is very good of Richardson, Maggette, Odom, Miller, Brand, and, eventually Olakandi would leave. But they essentially let Lamar Odom and Quentin Richardson walk for nothing, and the reasoning being that they were really just cheap at the time, and they didn't want to have to pay them bigger extensions. And so because of that, it set them back for the next, I'd say, 2 seasons, and then they finally got over the hump here in 06. But if they would have just kept those guys and then added a guy like Cassell as well, you would have had a way better looking roster rather than just letting the likes of Andre Miller and Lamar Odom and Quentin Richardson walk for nothing. That's 3 of your best 6 guys, and arguably you could say like your second, third, or probably your third best and your third, fourth, and fifth best guys walk for nothing. Which if any other NBA team did, they would tank as well, and that's what happened to the Clippers. And then lastly, even when they were good in 05 to 06, they only really got as far as they did because they got a lot of breaks. They faced the Nuggets in the first round, who were actually a worse team than them. And then the second round, they faced a Suns team that was missing Amari Stoudemire, who, if you forget, was good for 25 points a game around this time period. So I love this Clippers team. I know it sounds negative the way I'm presenting it, but I actually do love this Clippers team. And I hope if you guys didn't know much about them that you got to learn something today. So check out the other videos in the Rise and Fall series if you're interested, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.